Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode number 306, and I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. This week we are taking a question from a poster by the name of Buckeye Nation Railroader. Hey, I know who this is. And he asks, during the apocalypse, yeah, I mean, you did a valiant episode at, a valiant attempt at spelling that correctly. Was there any place in the U.S. or around the globe that you absolutely refused to go near? And I responded, usually after I learned my lesson once. The reason that I responded that is probably fairly obvious for those that follow the show. New York City. I would not go back there for many, many years after Yonkers, and I would not do so without a very highly trained U.S. military. One that had a much better sort of system of strategies and tactics for fighting zombies than the one, in the year after the Great Panic. Which, when was Yonkers? I think it was in the spring, or it was in the fall after, the year after the Great Panic. So 2013. Anyway, I don't totally remember. That should be etched in my mind, but I am awfully tired right now. It has been a long several days. We're in the process of buttoning up a lot of the operations here on the East Coast, getting them trimmed down. I talked about how our operations these days are fairly limited in scope, but there's a new operator that wants to take over from us, and as per the terms of our contract, we have to cede area to a new operator if that so arises. The Zombie Train Incorporated was never designed to be a permanent monopoly over the transit system of the United States. It was just supposed to be something that I could handle to sort of start pushing the world in the right direction after, all the war and everything. So, yeah, New York City was one. You'd think I would have learned my lesson from New York City and avoided major metropolitan areas, but as I've talked about, I have during the course of my career with the Zombie Train Incorporated in particular, staged a number of assaults on major cities, or semi-major cities, though none the size of New York, because, well, you can't get another city the size of New York on this continent. But I repeatedly, even during Zombie Train days, would make smash-and-grab raids into downtown Boston, which I was talking about in the fan chat earlier today. And we did go into a number of cities out west, including some of the suburbs of Chicago, while we were going across. Not that we really had an option at that point in time, we would run out of fuel. But let me think if there are any place in the world. I never set foot on any of the islands of the United Kingdom, with good reason. As previously explained, we had a lot of enemies there. Not ones that we went out of our way to create, but certainly ones that we weren't about to reconcile our differences with anytime soon. The Britons did a fairly good job of keeping us, A, on our toes on the high seas, and B, away from their little island, which I was more than happy to oblige, and to not go into Great Britain for any purpose whatsoever, or Ireland, or Scotland, or Wales. So, aside from that, I did go to the Mediterranean once. I didn't want to go that far inland because I didn't want to be that far from my ship. I do know that things were crazy in Russia, which I talked about, I believe, a couple of episodes ago. So, that isn't somewhere that I wanted to just waltz into and say hello. I don't even know who was in charge during the war. I have no idea what happened to Putin, actually, now that I think about it. I literally have no idea what happened to the man. I don't know if he ended up going into hiding. There were always tons of rumors, but I don't know if he got killed or what. He's not around today, so if he was in hiding, then he still is. There were a lot of other very spooky places that I heard about, especially North Korea. They apparently dug themselves a network of tunnels and sealed themselves in what were effectively vaults, but to my understanding, they were not zombie-tight, or there was one infected inside, and they were in fact zombie-tight. and everyone inside ended up dying. That's to my understanding because they unearthed those vaults, well, years ago now, but it was pretty deep into the war. They figured out what happened there. Again, that's something that you can check out Max Brooks's book for. He does a really good job of chronicling the war from a lot of angles that I never saw. And it's because he went around the world after the war ended and did a lot of interviews and stuff like that. So he did a really good job of chronicling stuff from the very beginning to the very end. It really helps you gain an understanding for how this whole thing started. It's just as well, there weren't areas that I wouldn't go to because of like a patient zero, you know? There weren't any areas that were like, oh, this area is super infected because this is where the infected started. There was a zombie infection that was actually fairly global but kept under wraps, as much as you can before the Great Panic. If it was public knowledge of which, there were murmurs about it, but it was never considered as something that's, the world's going to end, the world's going to end. It really felt like they did a really good job with the media and everything to make it seem like it was under control. And it really did up until it wasn't. It really was up until suddenly it seemed like there were zombies everywhere. It was startling. It was frightening, They totally underestimated the spread of these things. So one of the things that we learned during the course of the Zombie Train Incorporated was that no area is totally safe. You can cordon off an area and you can clear the hell out of it, but there's always going to end up being that one in a basement, or one in a closet, or one that was a person that came in and they were infected, they didn't know it yet, because the gestation period is like 24 hours or something like that. It's at least, it's a day, give or take, I should say. We've had instances where we haven't let people on the train because they were suspected of being infected and they just didn't know it yet. We've had instances where we booted somebody off the train because they had lied about being infected, or times where we had someone go unconscious on the train and we, inspected them and found a bite, and then we had to do what we had to do. And you could get, usually it was fluid-to-fluid transfer. You could get the virus from any zombie fluids or bits that basically got anywhere that you could get a disease. And I'm not talking skin, I'm talking about the eyes, the mouth, although if you were to ingest the flesh, if you were to try to eat a zombie, you would be dead from toxicity long before you ever were converted. And that is something that people don't necessarily realize. If you died by other means, you wouldn't really be able to be reanimated. You had to be alive at the point where the virus spread through your system. At least, that's my understanding. In a couple of episodes, we have a whole episode about Solanum, which is the virus and stuff. I'm supposed to be talking about places to avoid. So, places that were zombie territory. You've got any major city, or any place with a lot of rooms and doors, place where you'd have to go room by room, floor by floor to clear it out, because you don't know what's around that corner, and when you're fighting in close quarters, you do not have the advantage. Any place with bad sightlines, to continue on that thought. Thick, dense forests are a place to avoid, or were, they still kind of are. Again, nowhere is totally safe. We're living with this knowledge now that this could happen again. And we don't know how many times in history that something similar did happen, although, like I said, Max Brooks did an excellent job of going back through history books and trying to find any instances. And that was actually in a book that he released before the war, Zombie Survival Guide, which I did have. I probably still have it somewhere. It's probably in tatters at this point, to be honest. We used the hell out of it. But he went through and he chronicled all of the major events that are believed to be zombie infections or uprisings or whatever you want to call it. Not like a global thing like we had during the war, but minor incidents, relatively minor incidents. So, yeah, to add to that, any place with really murky water, especially swamps, if you have to put an anchor chain down, do it far from shore, because a zombie will climb up your anchor chain. They are not buoyant, so if you have a zombie in water, it will sink to the bottom and walk along the ocean floor, or the lake bed, or river bed, or whatever. But they are close to neutrally buoyant. So, yeah, while they will sink, if they get a hold of something, they can very easily pull themselves up an anchor chain, or a rope, or whatever. You would sometimes see zombies just hanging off of buoys because they climbed up the chain kind of on instinct, and then they don't really know what to do, so they're just hanging on a buoy. They're not that smart, as you might have figured or realized from all the conversations that I've had about zombies. They really operate 100% on instinct. They follow their prey, they follow it, they try to bust down anything between them and their prey. They don't really try to think about a way around, but sometimes they'll find one. They have really acute senses of smell, of hearing, and of sight to an extent. Sight is not as good, but smell and hearing is really good. Sight, I think is not good, and this is basic understanding of zombie, physiology, because your eyes stop working properly after they stop being moistened by your eyelids, and all of the zombies' fluids sort of congeal into this yucky, gooey paste stuff. It's disgusting, and also the cause of a lot of infections, because you shoot them and it splatters everywhere. It's really disgusting, brownish. I can't even begin to describe it, and it smells terrible. So, yeah, any place with bad line of sight, if you can find a wide open empty area, you will have a much better time with zombies, because you can get away from them, and because they can't surprise you. The thing with zombies is how relentless they are. They do not need to eat, they do not need to sleep, they don't need to do anything, they will follow you. And that's why, while you may want to avoid tight spaces, because you can get caught and killed, you also want to avoid really wide open spaces, particularly huge spaces. I've talked about the hordes in the Midwest, but there were reasons why anything that we did out in the Midwest, which we did a lot of sort of sand, I hesitate to call it quarrying, but we dug up clay for bricks and stuff like that, out there in the Midwest, out there on the Great Plains. The biggest problems that we had were these hordes that would come through, and honestly, everything or anything short of a massive military force was not enough to stop these massive hordes. If they were coming your way, you get out of dodge. If it comes during the night, you wake up and leave, or you die. And that's something we learned right after we left Appalachia. We had heard about them, but I don't know why we didn't really take them seriously. But people talking about, there's a horde million strong. It's indestructible, it's unstoppable. Us going, yeah, okay, well, we've dealt with some pretty big hordes before. Maybe we've dealt with 10,000 in a horde, outside of a city or something, where we were able to break off a chunk of it and deal with it. But then you see these, and it's like heads of zombies as far as the eye can see. It is wholly unnerving. And they're just coming. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can fire as many rounds as you have, but unless you have a boxcar of ammunition, it will do no good. They will keep coming. And that was by far the worst part about it. And that's what encouraged people to take up residence in cities and towns and stuff like that. If there's a time where you can separate yourself from the zombies vertically, you have a much better chance. They will pile on top of one another to climb up the side of a building, but if you're only dealing with a handful, if you can get up those stairs and destroy those stairs, you will have a very defensible position where you can pick them off with even a small gun or, something like a hatchet. There were lots of instances of people fighting off zombies with hand-to-hand weapons if they had a very defensible position. So, yeah, that's the short checklist. Giant wide open spaces, cities, and dense forest, anywhere with a poor sightline. The more desolate you are, and sometimes the more mountainous it is, the better chance you have. And that's why we would stay in Appalachia or go up north. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Trainman out.